to Pigskin Frenzy on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joel Norris, and whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, or listening on Podbean, a big thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like on each episode, and leave a comment down below. Spotify and Podbean, if you're listening on there, share around with others and follow on those platforms as well. We have X, Facebook, and Instagram. X, all you got to do is type in @Pigskin_Frenzy, all lowercase. Just type it in on the search engine. You'll follow there. You'll get episode updates as well as all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy, as well as news and highlights from across college and NFL football. Facebook and Instagram, just type in Pigskin Frenzy. You'll follow and like the pages there. You'll get episode updates. You'll get trivia questions on Instagram and their stories. Go and answer today's, as well as all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy. Here we go. College football coverage today. We're going to break down a wild week two. And here's the thing. I'm going to start off with saying this. I apologize to all my listeners out there. I apologize for breaking down some games that I've gotten wrong so far. I hope to do better. But 2 for 2 this week, so I'm a little bit better. 2 for 2. NFL, kind of on the fence right now, but 2 for 2 in college football. Let's talk about some of a wild week two. We're going to recap everything, and we're going to preview and predict a week 3 slate that, in my eyes, is not all that impressive, but there are some games that are underrated for week 3. So we're going to talk about those games. We're going to break those games down. Week 4, next week, we're going to have our friend of the show, our Pigskin Frenzy moderator, Noah Crow, on the show, and we're gonna recap week 3. We're also gonna discuss and preview and break down and predict week 4 matchups, top week 4 matchups. So gonna be an interesting one next Tuesday on the 19th. So and yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're going to break down week 2 here in a bit. We're going to break down week 3 and preview those top matchups for Saturday. Subscribe to YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Subscribe to YouTube. Like each episode. Follow on Spotify, Podbean. Share around with others on there. Share around and follow on X, Instagram, and Facebook for all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just break down some week 2 action. We're going to kick it off with Colorado, Nebraska. Opening game out of week 2. And you're going to think, Joel, you've been talking about Colorado a lot because how's it hard? It's hard not to talk about Colorado. It's really hard not to talk about them. They are indeed coming, according to Deion Sanders. They believe and they conquer, right? They believe and conquer. And that is what they do up in Boulder, Colorado. So Colorado, man, they're a team that it's going to be hard not to talk about. They got a game this week that I will preview and predict. They got a game next week that I'm going to preview and predict. And they have a game in 2 weeks that I will preview and predict. It's hard. For the rest of September, they're going to be on my top slate of games to pick and to preview and predict. I'm just going to let you know, spoiler alert there, because they got some interesting games coming up. They got Oregon next week, and they have USC in 2 weeks. Going to be something to watch out for and tread lightly on, because Oregon and USC are no joke. We're going to find out who Colorado is in the next couple of weeks. So just putting that out there. Let's break down their week 2 game. Colorado versus Nebraska. I said Colorado was going to win in a fairly uneven matchup, and they did. I was right about that. I was right about the outcome. I was right about, the style of play with it. But I didn't, really understand a lot of the, miscues on it. So we're going to get down to that in a minute. Final score was Colorado 36, Nebraska 14. Colorado had 396 passing yards to Nebraska's 119, while Nebraska had more rushing yards than Colorado, 222 to Colorado's 58. Colorado couldn't really get the ground game going a little bit. Now, it's weird because Dylan Edwards and Kavasi Smoke, all those guys who ran the ball against TCU had a great rushing attack against TCU, but against Nebraska, they really couldn't get the running game going. It was all about throwing the ball in the air. Now, when you look at it, Shedeur Sanders played it. He had a good game. Shedeur Sanders had 393 yards and 2 touchdowns. He played good. Now, there were some miscues on each end. So the first half, there were some miscues on Shadeur's part. Decision making was a little bit off, and it was one of those things where, you know, he was staying in the pocket, take the sack, and rather than throw it away. Miscues on that end, and it was like, those miscues that seem small will cost you some games in the future. So you really cannot do that against an Oregon, and you cannot do that against a USC. That's going to be hard to do. So I would tread lightly on that. So Shedeur Sanders, stat-wise, played a good game. First half, he looked a little hearsay. He looked okay, but he had a little bit of miscues. Even in the second half, he had some miscues in the second half. I think Shadeur's going to have to play a little bit better to beat an Oregon and beat a USC. But I am fully capable. And I'm a believer in Colorado now. Don't get me wrong. I'm a believer in Colorado now. I think Shedeur Sanders is a very underrated quarterback on his way to becoming a top quarterback this season in college football. I really believe that. But Shedeur made some mistakes there, and I will look to clean those up for Oregon and USC. Let's look at Xavier Weaver. Big highlight reel for him, in this game. He had 10 receptions, 170 yards, and 1 touchdown. He was there. He was Shadeur's go-to guy, for sure. Travis Hunter was getting double covered a lot. And Xavier Weaver, he was a good option there, and he was a problem for the secondary for Nebraska. So Weaver, good receiver there, and he's a solid number 2 for, behind Travis Hunter for that offense. So, Weaver, Hunter, watch out for those guys, right? So, defense was good for both teams. Nebraska had a solid defense, and I really liked their defensive line and how they put pressure on Shedeur. They looked really, really good up front on the front 7 for the Cornhuskers. They look good on defense. Nebraska overall is a good team. So I'm going to shift gears. I broke down Colorado. Let's talk about Nebraska just for a tiny bit before I move on. Nebraska looks good. You're going to think, okay, they got beat 36-14. Yes, they did. But I'm going to break down the reason why they got beat 36-14. Yes, they look good overall as a team on defense, and they got some playmakers on offense. Here is what I was wrong. I mentioned a key to this game was you need to expand the playbook for Jeff Sims, and you need to expand his role. I was right. Matt Rule did that. But here's what I was wrong about. Jeff Sims. You're thinking, wow, dude, you're just going to just blatantly say, you call it out. I am. Let's address the elephant in the room. For everybody listening, let's address the elephant in the room. Jeff Sims struggled. The margin of error is pretty big, and it fell on Jeff Sims. And I will say it fell on Jeff Sims because let's look at his stats. He was 9 for 15, 106 yards, and 1 interception. He would overthrow his guys. He would take sacks. He would, and by the way, that Colorado defense, much improved. That defense looks salty. That defense is a very stout defense. They look good on defense. TCU was a little bit of a different animal, but TCU is a good roster. They have a great roster. Looks a little bit different, okay? So let's just kind of, calm down on Colorado's defense. They look fine. Nebraska looks good too, but Nebraska's problem is Jeff Sims. Nebraska's problem, he missed throws. He would throw it. He would take sacks. He would overthrow guys. He threw picks. He had 1 interception, and this was against Minnesota as well. So I was thinking, okay, it may just be Minnesota. I know it's week 2. It's only week 2, but dude, Jeff Sims, man. Nebraska had a lot of moments in that game where they could have probably won that game and took a lead against Colorado. They looked good overall as a team, but Jeff Sims didn't. That's the problem. Jeff Sims didn't. So now after watching this game, my stance has kind of changed a little bit. You may want to go with somebody else at QB. That's just my take. Expand a little bit for Jeff Sims, I said last week. Now you're being a hypocrite, Joel. Now you're changing your tune. I'm changing my tune for a reason. He was a good reason of why the game, wasn't a thing. Yes, coaching could have been, is a huge issue, but Jeff Sims may not be the guy for Nebraska at this point in time. Heinrich Harburg stepped in late, and he scored a touchdown for Nebraska. They only scored 1 point, 1 touchdown. Granted, Jeff Sims is a solid running quarterback. He's fast. He's a speedy quarterback. He scored a rushing touchdown. That put him up, got him 7 points, their first touchdown. Then Heinrich Harburg threw a touchdown pass late in the game and gave him 14 points. They could have had a lot of points in that game, but I think the quarterback play is a must. They need to see and evaluate all options moving forward because Michigan's calling in a couple of weeks. They're going to up in Lincoln and going knocking on that door, and Michigan's coming calling. That's Jim Harbaugh's return game. This Saturday is the final game of suspension for him. And in the next couple of weeks, Jim Harbaugh will be back, and he will be rocking and rolling. And we're about to see a Michigan team that may put up a lot more points than what they've been putting up under Jim Harbaugh. So we'll see what's going on there. Final score, 36-14. Sorry I went on with a little bit of a long explanation with that one, but 36-14. Nebraska, solid team, and they can improve and they can rebuild. They just need to evaluate all options at quarterback at this point. So let's move on. Ole Miss, Tulane, real quickly. Final score, Ole Miss 37, Tulane 20. I apologize for this one. I did not know Michael Pratt, quarterback for Tulane, was hurt. He was hurt, and they were without him this past week. He was out. He missed this game. Crucial game to miss, too. But Kai Horton, Tulane's backup, was solid. 15 for 37, 231 yards, and 1 touchdown with only 1 interception. That was the only miscue Kai Horton had. But Tulane and Ole Miss going into the fourth was knotted up. It was tied. But Ole Miss I think Tulane had the lead at first. They kind of tied it up at the very end with Ole Miss, and then Tulane just eased their foot off the gas a little bit, and Ole Miss put their foot on the gas, and Ole Miss ran away with it. Tulane's got Micah Hughes at running back with 23 carries, 300 with 93 yards and 1 touchdown. Another running back option for them was Assad Clayton Johnson. He had 7 carries with 32 yards. Tulane's got a solid team. They got a solid defense as well. Their defense they looked really impressive on defense. That defense is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Group of 5 and in the American Conference. Let's look at Ole Miss. They're 2-0 now, and they're looking good at the top of the SEC West and at the SEC currently. Jackson Dart looking phenomenal again. 17 for 27 with 267 yards and 2 touchdowns and an interception. Jackson Dart looked really good. He made a few errors. I mean, like setting it in the pocket, taking some sacks that he could have gotten away from. But Jackson Dart still nonetheless looking impressive for this Ole Miss offense. Quinshon Judkins, 18 carries with 48 yards and 1 touchdown. The throwing game for Ole Miss, the passing attack has been impressive for Ole Miss. What's happening right now, the rushing game's kind of taking a back seat, which is weird because Quinshon Judkins was lights out last season. A little bit quiet to start off the first 2 weeks of the season, but it's only week 3. We can still work Judkins into the season. Judkins is a solid player, and he looked a little bit better than he did last week, but he's gotta work it in. Just ease it in. So only week 3. Quinshon Judkins solid back for Ole Miss and in the SEC. Both teams looked impressive in this one. They didn't really look bad. Ole Miss just ran away with it. They just ran away with it at the end. The only thing I would work on for Tulane is not taking your foot off the gas. It's not easing up. Don't ease up. Keep pressuring. Keep pounding. Just keep going away. Just keep pushing. And if you keep pushing, you're going to be in games, and you're going to win games that teams are not going to expect you to win. So Tulane looks solid. Final score in that one was 37-20 Ole Miss. Ole Miss looks impressive, and so does Tulane. So congratulations to both teams. Solid game. One of the better games of this weekend. So it was good. Moving on. I did not expect this. I said A&M was going to beat Miami, ladies and gentlemen. You can put it on there. Here's where the last two come in. Final score, Miami 48, Texas A&M 33. Let me repeat that. Miami 48, Texas A&M 33. Miami looked solid. I ain't gonna lie. Miami looked good. Miami looked good on offense, led by quarterback Tyler Van Dyke. I've said this. I said Tyler Van Dyke was going to be one of the most impressive one of the most impressive and underrated quarterbacks in that conference and in college football. Look at his stats: 21 for 30 with 374 yards and 5 touchdowns. 5 touchdowns he put up against Texas A&M's defense. Their receiving core was amazing. Xavier Restrepo, 6 receptions with 126 yards. Jacoby George had 5 receptions with 94 yards and 3 touchdowns. Colby Young had 6 receptions with 75 yards and 1 touchdown. Isaiah Horton had 1 reception with 52 yards and 1 touchdown. Big time plays that were being made against that defense. A huge kickoff return against A&M, where Miami special teams kind of bullied A&M on their special teams. And, Miami went in for the score. Good game for Miami. Miami's 2-0. A&M's 1-1. Miami looks solid. They can cause some problems. So if I'm North Carolina, if I'm Duke, if I'm Florida State, I'm watching out. And take that Miami game with a grain of salt on this one. I would look into Miami a little bit before saying, oh, this is going to be an easy win. Miami looks solid. I wouldn't say it's going to be an easy win. Miami's in the rankings now, along with Duke. So, just watch out. Just watch out for the U. Are they back? Early to say, but let's see. Let's go over with A&M really quick. A&M, they showed a little bit of promise on offense. They looked okay on offense, not like they did against New Mexico, but they looked okay. Their defense was the concerning point. Their defense, they couldn't stop Miami. They had some trouble on defense. I think some of the play calling was being jumbled up, and that is where my coaching questioning is coming in. Like I said earlier in the season with Jimbo Fisher. Is Jimbo going to be calling the plays? Is Bobby Petrino going to be calling the plays? Is he going to be calling the plays on defense? Is Jimbo going to be calling plays? That is the only thing. I was a little worried about, A&M because of what was going on to them. They didn't look all that impressive on defense. And New Mexico moved the ball on them a little bit. So it was okay. Their offense was the key theme last year. Now it's their defense that I'm kind of looking at and like, okay, what's going on here? Their defense is, it's a little bit easy to move the ball on them. It really is. And listen, you're going to have teams that are going to move the ball because they're doing it, hard. They're hard, like fighting to move the ball, and they're just better. You're going to have teams that come up across, It's good to have a back and forth game, but A&M's defense was it was easy for Miami to move the ball on them. And that's a little bit of a concerning trend, especially when you have games against Arkansas coming up. You have games against Alabama coming up. And later down the road, Ole Miss, Auburn, and LSU in the near future. So, Connor Wingman had he was 31 for 53 with 336 yards and 2 touchdowns, along with 2 interceptions. He also had 5 carries for 29 yards and a touchdown. So Connor Wingman had a busy day, but he didn't do it all by himself. He had 18 carries with Amari Daniels his running back had 18 carries with 62 yards and a touchdown, and Evan Stewart, his receiver, had 11 receptions with 142 yards. So that was his go-to guy. No touchdown for Evan Stewart this week, but Connor Wingman was trying to do it. He showed flashes of, okay, with that stat line, baller, right? But he also showed flashes kind of like Jaden Daniels against Florida State, where he showed signs of I'm doing too much. And he did. He showed signs of I'm just overdoing it. Don't overdo it, because that's going to get in your head. You're just going to get in your head of I'm playing hero ball, and that's going to cost you mistakes. It's going to cause mistakes, cause errors, and it's going to cost your team. And I think Connor Wingman had a little bit of that, against Miami. So final score of this one, 48-33. Here's where I would say about A&M. They got to improve. They got to improve on the defensive side of things, mainly in the middle, because Miami was killing them in the middle, and a lot on the outside as well. Miami was getting them in the secondary spot as well. Secondary is a little bit better, but it's not a thing that I would tread lightly. They looked a little bit better than the linebacker spots, but they still got scored on at will. So I would try to look into that as well. But the defense as a whole needs to be looked at before you get into the Ole Misses, the Alabamas, the Arkansas, and Auburns. Before you get into the conference play, right? So final score: Miami 48, A&M 33. A&M's going back to the drawing board. Miami looking impressive. If you see me on YouTube, I may be raising it up. So here we go, right? Let's go in with our final recap of week 2. And then we'll go into the polls. We'll read the polls off again. Then we're going to go into week 3 games. Real quickly, final score. And before I get into this, I was saying close game, Bama's got it. Close game, Alabama has it. Texas and Alabama. Big game of the weekend, right? And if you look into it, you're like, man, it's a close game, but talent-wise, how can Alabama not win this game? Final score, Texas 34, Alabama 24. It's a little bit quiet in here. You can hear a pin drop. Texas 34, Alabama 24. 10-point win for the Longhorns. And let me go on and tell you something. From the opening jump, Steve Sarkisian was calling a good game. He called a game start to finish. Great call of a game by head coach Steve Sarkisian. Round of applause for him. He is the third assistant to defeat Nick Saban. So, long pause there. Let's go in with the offense really quick for Texas. Quinn Ewers, the quarterback. I said that he was probably he was on his way to he could be on his way to a Heisman. I predicted that before the season started, and it's his odds have skyrocketed. He played a good game. 24 for 38 with 349 yards and 3 touchdowns. He didn't do it alone. His supporting cast was amazing. Running back Jonathan Brooks, who has replaced Bijan Robinson, 14 carries with 57 yards and 1 touchdown. Chatavian Sanders, their tight end, 5 receptions with 114 yards. He was throwing it to the tight end a lot, and Sanders had his way with a lot of the linebackers and safety spots for Alabama. A.D. Mitchell, y'all remember him from Georgia, the Georgia transfer from last season. He played the national championship game and 2 national championship games for Alabama. A.D. Mitchell, 3 receptions for and 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. He scored twice against Bama. Xavier Worthy, the star receiver for Texas, 5 receptions with 75 yards and 1 touchdown. Texas looked solid. Offensive side of the ball, they look good. They look good up front, and that is where I was impressed. Their offensive line looked really good against Bama's defensive line. And Bama's defensive line, with guys like Dallas Turner on the line, solid. They looked, solid defensive line for Bama. And Texas had their way a little bit with them. Bama fans are thinking, no, they didn't. But when you go back and watch, how did Texas get a lot of their plays off? It starts up front. Texas won the trenches. Anybody who says that Texas did not win up front is kind of blindsided a little bit. They're kind of blinded. You need to go back and watch the highlights. I think Texas was having their way in the trenches, and that's causing all these throws to be made, right? Obviously, it's football 101, guys. So they won up front, and the secondary, that was what was impressive about Texas. The matchups in the secondary spots. The receivers were getting open, beating out Bama's secondary, who has, listen, they have young players on secondary, okay? They have Caleb Downs. They have a lot of young guys on secondary, but they have guys like Malachi Moore in the secondary. Kool-Aid McKinstry got veterans in the secondary, and they were winning. They were winning those matchups. Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Sanders, they were all winning those matchups. And Quinn Ewers found some good matchups, and he launched it and made some good decisions. Touchdown Texas, and they put up 34 points. Good call of an offensive game. Let's talk about the defensive side of things for Texas. Texas looked good on defense as well. They put a lot of pressure. They put some pressure on Jalen Milroe, which caused Jalen Milroe the starting quarterback, and I'm about to get at Milroe in a minute, to make some mistakes. He made some mistakes. He had a little bit of happy feet. He caused him to run, and even when he did run, they would sack him or tackle him before he took off too long, right? So, yeah, Texas' defense looks solid. Their offense looks solid as well. They look like a top 5 team currently, which is surprising. They look like a top 5 team currently. They look really, really good. Congratulations to Texas on a win against Alabama. Now, let's go over to Bama. What does this mean for them? Let's go over Alabama. Jalen Milroe, 14 for 27 with 255 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. He had 15 carries with 44 yards. He led the day in rushing. Amari Niblack, their tight end, had 2 receptions with 45 yards and a touchdown. Jermaine Burton, the Georgia wide receiver transfer, who is back for another year at Alabama, 2 receptions with 58 yards and 1 touchdown. Kobe Prentice also had 5 receptions with 68 yards. The funny thing about this is, when you look at it, while Texas was good on the ground, Alabama was better. They had 2 more rushing yards than Texas, but Texas beat them in the passing game and in total yards. Alabama also had 10 penalties. This was a mistake by their part. 5 less than last season against Texas. Bama had, if you remember, when they went to Darrell Royal Stadium in Austin, they had 15 penalties last season against Texas. Bama did. Now they had 10 penalties, so 5 less, but still 10 penalties is a lot. Bama, if you don't know this, and I was reminded by this by my family member, my good old dad. Shout out to my dad. Bama led the league in the SEC in penalties last season. And I was like, oh, I forgot about that. I was talking to him. I was like, I forgot about that. They led the league in penalties, and they did. They had 10 penalties, and it's looking like they're leading the league in penalties again. There was a lot of penalties against Texas. And that must have cost them. Jalen Milroe threw good. He threw good. He had 2 touchdowns. He looked good. He looked good. But when you look at it, the errors that he did make were there. It was there. He made some good he launched the ball in the air, 2 touchdown passes. You're like, he's developed an arm, which Jalen Milroe has developed an arm. There's no way to not see that. But it's not just about developing an arm. It's about the decision making now at this point. Bryce Young's not there. It's not. He's okay. Jalen Milroe's going to throw slip passes, and it's going to be enough to let our talent get us by. You don't have a Jahmyr Gibbs. You don't have a Bryce Young. You don't have a lot of these guys, right? But what you do have is a mobile quarterback like a Jalen Milroe who can potentially win you some games, but the decision-making's got to be there. His decision-making was a little bit off against Texas, and it's almost thinking, okay, you got 2 other quarterbacks there. Are you going to pull the trigger on a Tyler Buckner or a Ty Simpson? I don't know. I'm not Nick Saban. I'm not Tommy Rees. But I will say this. Jalen Milroe, talent-wise, has shown promise. It's all about the mental aspect at this point. He's got to make better decisions to win these big-time games. You have Ole Miss at home. Great. You have Arkansas at home. Great. You have LSU and Tennessee at home. Great. Here's the thing. Here's the deal. You got some key road games. A&M's a road game also, but you got some games. Those games, even at home, are still going to be tough. And you got to look and you got to think, okay, what can we do to further prevent games like Texas from this? Because I'm not used to seeing, and this was telling, I'm not used to seeing Alabama with 1 loss on their record entering week 3. I'm not used to seeing that, okay? That's 1. Just like LSU at this point. And this is weird, point this out. We live in a world where LSU and Alabama are 1-1 entering week 3. That's weird. That is weird. But number 2, Bama fans were walking out. That's telling. I have not seen that ever out of my time of watching football since I was little. I've never seen Bama fans walk out of the stadium. and booing. They were booing a little bit. I've not seen that in a while. Bama showed that they were beatable a little bit, just like last season. Texas showed good stride of being a playoff team. So the playoff hype through the air for two teams right now, Florida State, Texas. It's not a good look for the SEC. What does this mean for the SEC? I want to get to that in a minute. But they showed where they looked a little bit defeated in some areas. Now, they can improve on some stuff. Tennessee is weeks out. Tennessee's weeks out. Let's not think about Tennessee. Let's not think about playoffs. Let's think about the corrections that need to be made right now. Starting with the area of quarterback. Is Jalen Milroe the guy? Could he be? I don't know. I can't answer that. But let's start there and let's build around that and let's see what else needs to be fixed as well. So, final score 34-24. Texas beats Alabama. Texas, solid team. Solid team. Gets playoff hype, started. Alabama, back to the drawing board, which is weird to say. Back to the drawing board. Alabama's got USF's this week. It's on the road, which is weird. A non-conference game on the road like that against a group of 5 opponent. South Florida, let's see what happens there. Let's see what happens. I'm curious to see what Alabama and what adjustments the Crimson Tide make this Saturday afternoon at 2:30 on ABC. So, 3:30 on ABC if you're in the Eastern time area. So, it's interesting to see Bama in this corner a little bit of, okay, we need to adjust a lot before we go to the playoffs. Or before, if we go to the playoffs, who knows? It's questionable. Now, here's the thing after this loss. Is the SEC broken? I read that article on ESPN. Is the SEC broken? LSU lost to Florida State. A&M lost to Miami. Bama lost to Texas. SEC's getting hammered. They're getting beat up. Some of the top teams are getting beat up. Ole Miss, they look like they could have gotten beat against Tulane. Is the SEC broken? I wouldn't say broken, but I'm going to say this. The SEC is starting off a little bit slow right now. Everybody else is stepping up, and the SEC is slowing down a little bit. If I'm a conference that has such prestige and class as the SEC and top teams in that conference who potentially have the shot at making the playoffs, Georgia's also starting off slow. They started off slow against Ball State and UT Martin so far. So this Saturday, Georgia has South Carolina. Spoiler alert, I'm picking Georgia for that one, but we'll see what happens. It's not on my list of games to pick, but I'm picking Georgia to beat South Carolina. It's on the CBS Saturday at 3:30 Eastern. So when you look at it, I think the SEC is starting off slow. They're not broken, but they're starting off slow. They need to pick it up. I can tell you that for sure. They need to pick it up. The ACC and the Pac-12, the ones that everyone was talking about, disbanding and all that, is it kind of funny that those are the conferences that are the top conferences in games right now? Isn't that funny, ladies and gentlemen? That's funny when you look at it. Oh, Pac-12's gone, but they're the top conference right now when it comes to winning football games. Yeah, sure. They may not play a whole lot of teams, but Washington State played Wisconsin and beat them and knocked them out of the rankings. Colorado played Nebraska, beat them 36-14. Oregon puts up 81 points. USC with Caleb Williams looking impressive. Washington in the top 10 with number 8. When you look at the Pac-12, they look like the team that's winning all the games. SEC starting off slow. They're getting pushed around and beat. I'm not used to seeing that. SEC, it's a little bit of call out right now. SEC needs to pick it up, and they really do. They need to pick it up when it comes to games. I'm not saying they're not the top conference, which they are. They're the top conference in college football still, but they're slowing down against these other schools and conferences, man. Texas, a future SEC team, is showing that they're ready for next year against Alabama. They showed next year that they are ready to take on LSU, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Oklahoma again in the SEC, but they're showing that. They're showing that. So I'd watch out for a little bit. If I'm the SEC, I'd take note and just pick it up. That was my long recap of week 2. I apologize. SEC is just fine. They just got to pick it up on some games. So SEC's not broken. No, they just have to step up and play some and act a little with a little bit of precision and pressure of, hey, we're still the SEC, don't mess with us kind of mentality. So yes, SEC's just fine. They're just starting off a little bit slow. Now let's move on to the polls before we break down some week 3 games. And real quickly. Sorry for taking over having that long time with the recap of week 2. Let's break down week 3 matchups. And before that, let's go to the polls. Polls after week 2 look like this. AP polls: Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2, Florida State moves up to 3. Who's at 4? Hook 'em. Texas is at 4 after defeating Alabama. Alabama leaves the number 4 spot, and they leave the top 5. Number 5, USC. SC jumps Ohio State. Ohio State is at 6. They flip-flop. USC's looking a little bit more impressive than Ohio State. That's why they put them at 5, and I would put them at 5 over Ohio State as well. Ohio State at 6. Penn State at 7. Penn State still looking good with Drew Allard. I think Penn State could show some fight against Michigan and Ohio State. I really do. When you look at the competition between Ohio State and Penn State is arguably looking good. That matchup is setting up to be solid. So, number 8, Washington, they look good. Number 9, Notre Dame, they look solid. Number 10, Alabama. They are in the top 10 still. The polls still favor Bama. They're still in the top 10, but they're barely in the top 10. They're number 10 after what happened to them against Texas. Number 11, Tennessee. Tennessee falls out. They go from number 9 to 11 because of their first half against Austin Peay. They didn't look too good in the first half against Austin Peay, but they picked it up, and they ended up blowing them out and running away with it in the second half. 2-0 Tennessee at 11. Utah at 12 after surviving a close one against Baylor. Their ranking didn't change. Oregon wins. Their ranking doesn't change. LSU gets their first win into the season against Grambling. They're at 14. They don't change. Kansas State does not change. They're at 15, 2-0. Oregon State doesn't change. They're at 2-0. Ole Miss at 22. All right, I'm sorry. They were at 20. They move up 3 spots to 17 after beating Tulane. Number 18, Colorado, 2-0. And by the way, Ole Miss at the top of the SEC West rankings now. Number 1, Ole Miss. Number 18, Colorado, 2-0. They're coming, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they said. They went from 22 to 18. They are indeed coming. Oklahoma at 18 moves down 1 spot to 19. They're at 2-0. Number 20, North Carolina. They were at 17. They moved down 3 spots because of their close loss to their close win against App State. They didn't really show a lot of flash. They need to look a little bit better throughout the season with teams like Duke, Miami, and Florida State, and Clemson on their repertoire. Clemson not starting off the best either. They ended up running away with it, but they didn't look too shabby against, and not too shabby. They didn't look too impressive against Charleston Southern. So number 20, North Carolina. Number 21, Duke. Is this basketball? When did you see North Carolina and Duke in the same AP poll in football? But nonetheless, Duke is 21, 2-0. Impressive showing. Their ranking's still the same. Miami enters the polls at 22. Miami back in the rankings after beating A&M. Washington State is back in the polls. Wazoo at 23. UCLA back in the polls at 24. They look good, and they are 2-0 after a hot start. And number 25, Iowa. 2-0, impressive wins, back-to-back weeks. They look solid, and Iowa's back in the top 25. Who lost and who's out of the rankings? Tulane, Wisconsin, and Clemson is out of the rankings. That is a shocker. When's the last time y'all seen Clemson out of the rankings, ladies and gentlemen? That is amazing. That's amazing. I mean, Clemson out of the rankings. I mean, it's not surprising after the first 2 weeks. They kind of need to pick it up a little bit, but Clemson out of the rankings. It's been a hot minute since we've seen Clemson not ranked. Wonder what Dabo's got to think about that. That's a whole nother conversation. But let's break down some week 3 matchups. Interesting polls. Clemson out of the rankings. What I got to say about Clemson really quick, and I will touch on this. They didn't look too impressive against Duke. There was a lot of mistakes there. There was a lot of mistakes in the first half against Charleston Southern. They should have, and they did end up blowing them out in the second half, but they didn't look too impressive, and that's why they dropped them out. That being said, they have the talent. They got to find a way to get a little bit more going on their offense and defensive fronts. Defense looks a little bit of suspect. The tackling is not there. I don't know what's going on, but it falls on a coaching issue. It's a coaching standpoint, and they need to get them ready to play. I think it's a coaching standpoint and a coaching, coaching. It all falls on coaching for Clemson. They need to get them more prepared. That's it. They just need to get them more prepared because they're not prepared, and their mentality is not there. It's not how it's been, and they need to change their mentality in order to get back to where they need to be, and that's in the rankings. They're 1-1, not ranked, and I'm not used to seeing Clemson like that. It's a weird year, Twilight Zone, that Clemson's not in the rankings, but nonetheless, they're not. So let's break down some week 3 games, and the first one we're going to break down, and it's not too much of an impressive slate. You're thinking you don't have South Carolina and Georgia on here, and you don't have Mississippi State and LSU on here. Honorable mentions. LSU wins a close one Saturday morning. LSU wins a close one Saturday morning. I may tweet it out, the score and all, but LSU wins a close one. I'll give it a 31-24 win against Mississippi State. I'll give Georgia a 45-24 win against South Carolina. Those are honorable mentions, but let's break down these games. Minnesota, North Carolina. Athan Kalaiakamanis. Quarterback for Minnesota. Very underrated QB in the Big Ten, and he's a key part in my keys to this game. He needs to have more of a solid game with a few errors because he had a few errors these past couple of weeks, and I know he can do a little bit better for that offense, so Athan Kalaiakamanis needs to have a solid game with few errors. That's key number 1. Key number 2 for North Carolina. Keep an eye on this and keep on with the ground and pound. I think running the ball needs to be a little bit more of their strong suit at this point because it's working. It's working. So Drake May, solid quarterback, but their running game is what's kind of keeping them in some of these ball games right at this point. Drake May's solid quarterback, but he's kind of having a shaky start right now. As he bleeds into the season, I think Drake May will be a key part of this offense. But for right now, keep on with the ground and pound for this team. Minnesota, North Carolina. Interesting one. Minnesota coming down to North Carolina, to Chapel Hill. Very interesting here. Who do I have winning this? I got North Carolina, close one. North Carolina keeps it going against Minnesota. Minnesota undefeated, North Carolina undefeated. Somebody's O's got to go, and it's got to be Minnesota's. North Carolina beats Minnesota. I'm going to give it a score of 24-17. Close game. I'm going to give it a close game. I think Minnesota's got a good team and a solid, underrated team to keep up with these games, and I think North Carolina beats Minnesota 24-17. Go-ahead touchdown with like 5 minutes left in the fourth to seal the win for North Carolina. 24-17, North Carolina beats Minnesota at 2:30. Night games. Let's go on with this. Tennessee at Florida. Florida had an impressive win against McNeese. They bounced back after a rough showing against Utah, but Graham Mertz had a little bit of effect. It was more of a ground game with Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne for Florida. O-line still looks a little suspect, though. They missed a few blocks, even though it was a 49-7 win. O-line looked a little bit more suspect, while Tennessee did struggle, which is kind of concerning going into the swamp, but they did struggle. However, they still have a salty defense that could probably tackle that O-line. So here's some three key things for this game. Number one, the O-line for Florida needs to block, and they need to block heavy against a tough front seven for Tennessee. Tennessee looks good on defense, and they have some big guys that could probably outman you and in physicality, just beat you, right? You have to block in some key areas in the trenches, and that's the only way you're going to move the ball on this team, right? So key O-line for Florida needs to block a lot better than what they've been doing. If I'm Tennessee, I'm blocking out the noise at the swamp. Don't even listen to the crowd noise. Do you guys, and you're fine. Do you guys and play productive ball on offense, and you're fine. Tennessee secondary against Florida's receivers, and that's what I have there. Who wins the matchups between there, right? With guys like Ricky Pearsall, for Florida, it's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens there, right? Between Florida's receivers and between Tennessee's secondary. Who do I have winning this one? Unfortunately, I do not think it's close. I don't think Florida has shown me enough to say otherwise. I think it's not going to be close. I say Tennessee does go into the swamp and beats them by a couple scores. I say it's going to be, about 45-21. 45 Tennessee, Florida 21. Florida goes to 1-2 at home against Tennessee. Tennessee moves to 3-0, and Tennessee's looking good with Joe Milton III. So I don't think Florida has shown me quite enough yet to compete with Tennessee right now at this point. Tennessee beats them 45-21. Georgia Tech, Ole Miss. Here we go. And keep in mind, Georgia Tech, solid team. If you look at Georgia Tech, they did, and listen, Georgia Tech had a rough slate. Okay, they did. Georgia Tech had and as I'm pulling Georgia Tech up now, they had a more of a rough slate against in week one, but they bounced back. Right? They bounced back. They're 1-1. Tough home opener. Tough opener against Louisville. Leading the game, they got they ended up. Louisville ended up coming back and beating them. They beat up South Carolina State 48-13 at Bobby Dodd Stadium, and now they got to go to Oxford. Tough game on SEC Network. Tough game. 1-1 against 2-0. So let's go over some key games. Some keys for this game. My bad. Keys for this game. Georgia Tech, find a way to contain Jackson Dart and Quinshawn Johnson. That combo is going to be solid for Ole Miss. That's number one key for Georgia Tech. And then the key for Ole Miss, establish Quinshawn Johnson more. Quinshawn Judkins more. You got to establish Quinshawn Judkins a lot more. So for Georgia Tech, find a way to contain Jackson Dart and Quinshawn Judkins. For Ole Miss, you got to get Judkins involved a little bit more in the ground game. I think if you run the ball a lot against Georgia Tech is going to crumble a little bit. I highly believe that. I think their rushing defense is hearsay, and I think if you establish the best running back in the conference, a lot more on the ground, Judkins will have a day. So, who do I have winning this one? Ole Miss wins it, and it's going to be a score of 42-17. 42-17, Ole Miss beats Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is 1-2. Ole Miss is 3-0, heading in to a primetime showdown in Tuscaloosa against Alabama for Ole Miss. Going in there undefeated, 3-0. Last but not least, Colorado State versus Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Showdown. College Game Day is going to be there. Everybody's pumped. Key matchup for Colorado State is their secondary versus the receivers. How are they going to do against Xavier Weaver and Travis Hunter? That's going to be key in this game. The secondary versus the receivers. Can they keep up with them? Key, and then the last key, and it's for Colorado, Shadur Sanders making more precise decisions. And I say that by scrambling away from the pocket, not taking the sacks, throwing the ball when you need to, and how are you going to do there, right? And that's it. Like what's going to happen there? So making more precise decisions to win the game. Okay, throwing the ball when you need to, not taking the sacks, not just standing there, making more precise decisions. For 60 minutes, not just in one half, but for 60 minutes. So who do I have winning this one? Colorado, of course, right? Colorado. Colorado beats Colorado State, I say, about a score of 35-14. Similar score to Nebraska. I'll say similar score to Nebraska. 35-14. Colorado beats Colorado State in the Rocky Mountain Showdown. 35-14. Pac-12 after dark game due to the fact that it's, West Coast ball, right? So 35-14. Colorado 3-0 heading into a showdown against, in my opinion, undefeated Oregon. Congratulations on a good win against Texas Tech, by the way, this past week. Colorado against undefeated Oregon at Eugene, setting up for a prime time showdown there. So I can't wait for that game. Top three, those are the matchups. We broke down week 3, and we're out of time. So a big thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday afternoon to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like each episode, and leave comments down below. If you're listening on Spotify and Podbean, follow on there and share around with others on there. X, Instagram, and Facebook. X, at Pigskin_Frenzy, all lowercase. All you got to do is type that in, follow and like the page there. You'll get episode updates as well as news and highlights from across college and NFL football. Facebook and Instagram, all you got to do is type in Pigskin Frenzy, follow the page there. You'll get episode updates. Go and answer today's trivia question on Instagram story, and you'll get all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy. A big thank you today just for taking some time and listening. NFL Thursday, this coming up, we're going to break down week 1's matchups. We're going to talk about week 2's top matchups. It's going to be fun. NFL is back and football is back in full swing. Keep plugging into Pigskin Frenzy. I'm Joel Norris signing off. We'll see you Thursday. And for everybody out there, stay the course.